Steve Wall, and they're going to tell us something about a tree. But first of all, I want to remind you of a few other things. First of all, I've had to deal with it. I just came in at 3 o'clock last night after dealing with burst pipe. As climate changes, so the Arctic air comes further down, and you're going to get more cold in some places as well as more warmth. So having a cold season means that many of you out there will need to make sure that you don't have a pipe against an outside wall. In the future, you may have lower temperatures. And so the plumber that came to fix this pipe it's in our warehouse. And he had 100 calls for burst pipes. So it would behoove you, if you're out there, to make sure that your pipes are not up against a concrete brick or a wall that's got access to cold. If it's low, where you have soil, that's friendly, but once you get up in the air, it can freeze. And if it's copper pipe, it's likely to freeze more, I think, than a steel pipe. Friendly snow removal. You have to give the cities credit for figuring out what is happening with the weather. We've had a fairly cold weather with a lot of snow. Do you wait for it to melt because the temperature goes from minus 11 to 37, or do you? First of all, you're by law supposed to be shoveling your snow 4 feet wide so people can get in and out. But then the decision was made in Champaign, at least, and I assume in Urbana counterpart, to remove the snow not only off the streets themselves, but off the sidewalks. And that can be a problem. I had a friendly call, and I really appreciate it, from the city, because I have a bench outside which we use to work with salvage and which people sit on. In summertime we have flowers out there and antique things in the window, and people enjoy that seat. But I was asked to move it. Well, that's a problem. It has a key because otherwise it would float off. And last time we did this in the middle of winter, the whole bench disappeared, and the city kindly made me a replacement, which is a very good bench, so it's locked down. Just even finding the key is a problem. But the other alternative is to work around it, to uncover it. I also have some display equipment and materials that is very hard to remove, partially because this street has been in its day a fairly raunchy street and still has some elements of problems. We had, about 10 years ago, we had a person die just across the road, and it just reminds us that if you're in bar territory, you have to be cautious and helpful. And that's really, the number of bars here have been quite wonderful. Not a lot of rolling drunks or anything like that, but we just have to be careful. And sometimes a flower or a daisy or two in the street helps people to appreciate the street. In its day, before there was the Lincoln Building, this was mainly all bars and starting price betting, and there was even a brothel or two. So it just was a part of downtown Champaign which has changed and gentrified, and that's happening. So I removed the snow from around the bench, and I talked to Dennis Smith, the physical plant director, and I said, When this happened a year or two ago, I was a little disappointed that the new streetscape at that time was damaged somewhat by front-end loaders and equipment pushing into the concrete. And I thought that, that 30 years down the line, you'll be spending another $1 million replacing the concrete. So could it be a little gently done so that didn't happen? And Dennis was not sure that was totally true. Totally true. But I had been around a number of streets and recorded that. I'd not really taken it any further, but I thought I'd call Dennis, and he listened to me and explained that what they were going to do was put skidsters on, taking this stuff out at the side, and they were going to uncover the bicycle racks, which are a problem because a bicycle tied up can often get disconvolvulated by this sort of activity. But I was very, very pleased. They came by midnight Friday, and a crew came and removed the snow from around every bicycle rack, and I removed it around my deck, and they came with skidsters, and the skidsters took the basic snow out into the middle of the street and made a pile, so then a big front-end loader could come along and put it in a truck and take it away. So I'm very pleased with that, and I want to congratulate the city on doing that. Another thing I wanted to mention was the front page of the News Gazette, Way Clear for Trail Project. And that's rather wonderful. We've been talking about it quite a bit. I want to get to the tree, but it's a little strange for us because when we wanted to, after like 20 years of work, we wanted to take out a federal Rail Banking Act interim trail use agreement. We had proselytized the community, warned them that there was a Rail Banking Act, which is a cooperative deal between bicycle people and the rail people to try and save some of the rail beds. The federal government felt that they were taking out too many railroads. They didn't have enough networking to get troops across the country and things like that. So they made a deal with the rail trail people to allow for a trail. They quieted the titles so there was contiguity of the trail. They kept the bridges, which usually are taken out by mandate so that no one will commit suicide off the bridge. And they gave money. So on that basis, CCDC took over, but Heartland Pathways was game to take the move, and whenever no one else would do it, we signed an interim trail use agreement between Conrail, ourselves, and Surface Transportation, which is more or less the Federal Department of Transportation. And we went to various organizations like cities and the like to get funding, because what we were doing there was promising to buy the land from Conrail, and then we would own it, but with the quid pro quo that if a railroad wanted to come back in, they could do so. So if you could imagine the politics, that you would have a new industry at Fithian, for instance. The politics could be that they would need a railhead that could come back. That always worries the recreational people who dearly want a rail trail, and there are thousands of these across the country now. They're very, very popular, and the railroads are getting a little wary of them because when very, very few of them have gone back to rail. But when they have gone back to rail, there's been a mountain of protests from people who don't realize that the money that they've used to make the trail is coming from the Surface Transportation Rail Banking Act. So we were out there with little promos that before the rail was taken off the bridge, we tried to get $3,000 to keep the rail on the bridge because it keeps the bridge together, things like that. So we did a lot of basic work, but not a word of that comes out in the reports from the newspaper and the like. So that's very pleasing. It eventually CSX bought it. CSX then wanted an arm and a leg for the price. The agreement has been $600,000 from the Forest Preserve, $600,000 from the Vermilion County Conservation District, and enhancement money coming from the Federal Surface Transportation at Springfield, and state and business and tourism money, and voluntary money. This trail will go into action, and it may be 50 or 100 years before there was any question about being reused as a rail, and that's very good. It's a multi-million-dollar process. Just fixing up the bridge at Danville over the Vermilion River. It's 160 feet off the ground, quarter mile long, and that will take probably quite a bit of money to make sure that there's fences on the side so that people don't fall off, and a surface on the top so people can travel on it. And then there'll be need in Urbana and Danville, there will need to be starting points. So where do you come from Dobbins Drive to Main Street to go along by Walmart and out to Mayview and on? So that's enough for that one.
Quick question, if I could.
Yes.
So it sounds as though we paid CSX on the order of $1.2 million or something for the right to take what used to be their railway and put a trail out there. If we had simply said, you know what, we don't want this possibility that 50 years from now they could come back and say, knock, 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 we want to use that for rail again, what would it have cost to have actually bought, permanently, just owned all of that length?
I think as I read it, CSX wanted $2.1 million.
So this
payment.
About in half. You're paying about half as much with the possibility that, again, 50 years from now, and again, the sooner they come back and say, okay, we want it back now, the more they have to pay you for the work that you've put in, and now you're not going to be able to use the trail anymore. The
advantage to CSX is that they have the right to come back in, or any other railroad has the right to come back in. They also have accepted a payment of $120,000, which is about the appraisal price. You take the adjacent land and halve it because there's junk and whatnot on the railroad bed. So that's a reasonable price, but CSX wants more than that. So they've taken a write-off for the rest. It's a tax write-off, and that's advantageous. So CSX gets the advantage of railback and tax exemption. The rail trail people get the action. Now it's amortized, so if you use the trail and the money has been put in, public money, for 2 years, you're going to have to, the railroad company has to buy back their land plus pay for the damage to the trail. If you've used it for 100 years, the amortization value is very low because you've had use for that time. But the lawyers associated with the rail trail people are very definite about encouraging people to realize that this is an interim trail use agreement, and the money that you're getting is called enhancement money. It's often many thousands, and perhaps even millions in some cases. It's coming from that act, and your benefit of the rail is coming from that act. Just realize it, and don't throw rotten eggs at the train if it comes back in. So, yeah, that gets that. Okay. I think that gets me. We're back to trees, and so a very nice meeting yesterday, a meeting to try and get an idea of how we look at a wonderful tree on Kohler and High Street in Urbana. It's tall, it's got a long barrel, it's above a house, it could break and fall. It's old, it's a hackberry, which is not a very permanent tree, it's not like an oak, it's a fast growing tree and it can break down. And my comment was that we don't have a Clark Lindsay for trees. We can't move them to a center. We have to think about whether we want to save a tree in location. And that is the question. How do we go to Mike Brunk, the arborist? Nice little notice sitting alongside the tree at the moment which says this tree is about to come down because it's dangerous. So let's ask our guests to say something about this tree because it does have the quality of heritage. It's large and people love trees. They don't love prairies, I'm afraid. They can hug a tree, and in fact, some of the people that were at the meeting were thinking to hug this tree. So there's a sort of spiritual sensitivity here in the neighborhood to save this tree. How do you do it, and what is the technology that's involved? So, Dennis, tell us something about the tree and why you would want to save it.
So thank you so much for inviting us yesterday to come onto the program and talk about this what we hope to make a legacy tree in Urbana. And I'll just say that I'm a member of the City Council. I live in East Urbana, but I have often enjoyed the beautiful arboreal forest that we have in this town. I live in an upstairs part of my home. I often watch squirrels rampaging up and down the branches of the trees outside my windows, and the birds who come and eat the berries off of the various bushes. And I have a large hackberry on my property, and I can attest to they're prolific in attempting to spread from seed pods or little berries throughout my backyard. But this particular tree is an immense, noticeably huge monarch in terms of hackberry status. And it had just come to my recent attention when I received an email from Steve Wald, who's also sitting here, that the tree had been marked for removal by the Arbor Division. Now, I've noticed in the past, actually several different years, and sometimes in my neighborhood, that a tree will be there and you'll just take it for granted and you'll enjoy its huge canopy in the summer, the leaves that provide shade, and its stature in the winter when you can see the structure of its bark and tree and the branching. And you think, well, this is a beautiful tree in my neighborhood. And then one day you'll come and there's a crew in the tree, and already a third of it is missing, and more and more is being cut down. And you walk up to the crew and say, what is happening? What's going on? Why are you doing this? And they'll say, well, this tree was slated for removal and we're doing it. Well, that is a great concern to the neighborhood and those people who love trees. And we found that there was a white dot indicating selection for removal on this tree in particular. And I appreciate Steve Wald drawing it to all of our attention. And I think that I'll let him mention a little bit about his experience with the tree. And the fact is that we're trying to ask the questions, how to preserve the tree rather than to remove it.
Thanks, Dennis. Hey, thank you, David, for having us on the show today. It's an honor to be here. And I'm really thrilled that hopefully more people will come to know this tree and have a chance to go look at it themselves if they're not already familiar with it. This tree grows about a block from my home, and I've lived in Urbana for about 7 years, and my wife and I started our family right when we moved here, so I have a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old boy as well. When we're out for walks in the neighborhood, we'll often divert our walk to walk by this tree because its proportions are are so impressive and inspiring. Before coming to Urbana, we lived on the West Coast where trees grow very large indeed, and we were thrilled when we moved here to find trees growing right near our house of similar proportions. This tree's trunk is over 5 feet thick.
Well, you lost 3 trees that were like it.
That's true. I said that yesterday. Yeah, we picked a house. Of course, Urbana is blessed with a beautiful, mature forest. And but you're right. We chose our house in part because of 4 absolute giants of trees that were within a block. And so 7 years in, 3 of the 4 of those trees have come down for various reasons.
And what you're really asking is for transparency and an interaction between yourselves and the foresters. It's very dramatic that the foresters have the authority to manage the urban forest. And they don't always want to tell you that they're going to take a tree down, because then there is this battle about the trees. And it also has a liability problem, because if a tree is regarded as unsafe, then you might want to avoid it or something like that. So this is helpful to have the public talking to the forester.
I think it is. First of all, I have enormous respect for the city arborist and the arbor division and the work they do. The big trees around town are a testament to their excellent work, and it takes decades of stewardship to have an urban forest like we have. That said, these are public trees. They're managed with taxpayer funds, and so the whole citizenry not only enjoys the tree's beauty and care, but have invested in their care, and it's really a common resource that's being managed on behalf of the city. And so the public's voice in the input about their management, I think, is vital. I think the city arborist and the city would agree that public input about the tree, the city knowing and the arborist knowing which trees are of highest value to the citizens is a vital part of being able to manage them wisely.
I think it has been growing, this interest and concern. There was a tree over by University and Race. There was a tree by the Long Garage. Sometimes they're in the city right-of-way. This one is in the city right-of-way. Other trees are in private property. We've been going through a period in the last 100 years of people who were foresters who needed to get wood for buildings. So they're board feet foresters. Now you're looking at foresters who are urban foresters, and when you're doing urban things, you have to relate with people's, and that's what we're begging, I think.
That's just right.
Sure. Yes, and to help in that direction, fairly recently, the City of Urbana adopted a legacy tree program passed by ordinance, and it helps to establish not only a standard for honoring the important trees in our community and also locating them on a forestry map of the city, but it also gives a process for nominating trees both on private property and in the right-of-way of the public to be recognized as a legacy tree. It establishes criteria of about 8 different standards by which a tree can be nominated. These are standards which help to establish the importance of the tree in the community. Things like its huge size and girth, its uniqueness, its unique species perhaps in the area, historic associations that may be found that have to do with the tree or the property upon which the tree is growing, and several others which I could talk about perhaps. But then there's a process for the nomination, and then an evaluation by our tree commission. And our tree commissioners have not ever before processed a nomination, but in the interest of seeking preservation for this particular tree because of some of the known qualities that it has, historic as well as dimensional, Steve Wald has made an official nomination and given it to the Arbor Division. And so we're concerned because we were told that the tree was ready for immediate removal. And so now we have asked that the City Tree Commission evaluate the tree and receive our nomination proposal at their next meeting, which actually was scheduled to be in March because they only meet 4 times a year. Well, the conditions are such that we don't want to wait until March, and so Mike Brunk has arranged to have a meeting of the Tree Commission, a special meeting called, and it'll be at 7 o'clock on January 16th, on Thursday, in the City Building on Vine Street. And so we're not only have the nomination in place, but we are looking now for the community to support this nomination and to assure that this wonderful tree can become perhaps the first legacy tree that is successfully nominated. And it would be a very great, wonderful accomplishment to achieve that.
You're also wanting to understand what the technology is, what can save this tree. If it is filled with concrete in a hollow, does that make it weaker? I think that's what you're begging for, is to know more, and it might be quite common sense to take it down in the long run because you might find that it's impossible to save it. But while it's alive, it's alive.
That's right. That's right. So this is Steve Wald again. Well, we're very just to understand again, the tree when we discovered it just after Christmas had been marked for removal, and when we made an initial inquiry, we were told that yes, its contracted for removal had been granted, and that it could come down any day, as soon as the next business day. It may be removed. So. One thing that's wonderful, I understand the city heard from several dozen people over the course of a weekend objecting to that state of affairs and calling for at least a pause so the tree could be recognized and considered. And that pause was granted. The city arborist said, although he considers it hazardous, it's not an imminent hazard. It's, diagnostic technologies and supportive measures could be taken to preserve the tree. Can those be specified, and can those be put before the public and the Tree Commission and whomever else is the decision maker about this to consider whether that's reasonable or not?
One of the concerns seems to be that the upper branches, when they leaf out in spring, get to be weighted down with leaves. And I don't know whether it's possible, can they prune the limbs back a little bit to reduce the weight that might actually bring down the tree? You've also got to concern storms, because what happens is these trees that were planted because they grew quickly are subject to getting old, and when a real storm comes through, it can take out like 30 trees if you're not very careful.
That's right. Well, and this tree, which we estimate to be, well over 100 years old, perhaps 200 years old, has obviously weathered many storms in its day. As the tree ages, its transition from into decline and potential fragility is obviously along a continuum. It's a gray area. There's nothing immediate about the tree that would suggest it's become suddenly weaker than it was a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. But you're right. The question of what can be done in terms of reducing the hazard is really one of the first questions that we would have.
One of the questions might be that if technological measures have to be taken, it may be costly. So then you need fundraising in the community to try and save the tree using the technology that might be recommended. It's not a situation where it's a we they. It's a situation of we they together trying to figure out what you can do with this elderly tree.
Yes, that's very true. And our community has the resources at hand to address a lot of the questions that might come up. Many other communities, when they have try to make an evaluation of their tree heritage and their tree stock, aren't perhaps as lucky as Urbana. We have different departments at the university. We have structural engineer department that might be able to talk about and measure, torque ability or torque data, about tensile strength of the bark. There are ways of testing that. There are other people who have a insight into the best practice for tree preservation. There may be things that we can do in the tree, around the tree, to assist it to continue living a healthy, extended experience. And I'd like to sometimes say that because our grandfathers become 78 years old doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to shoot them today because they might have a heart attack in 2 years. I think that we have to realize that this is a living entity, that we can find ways there are ways that we can assist the tree and prolong its life. You wouldn't put down a pet before its time because it had a physical condition. We take it to the vet. I think that we can approach this tree in the same way. So really, we're kind of looking, I guess what I would like to do is ask those people in the community, especially those people who are associated with these studies at the university, to assist us, and this could be kind of a donation of time and energy and expertise in this initial evaluation for this tree. I think there are people who could help in making that determination. We do have an excellent arborist, but like many people, they like to get a second opinion from a local doctor if you have an illness and you are trying to establish some kind of a meter for prognosis. So that would be my hope.
I would comment that I drove down that street yesterday, and it's a brick street. And it's had parking on both sides, and you can see where the cars have been parking, and they've made a small dent in the street. So there's a puddle of water, and there's a sequence of puddles of water all the way down the street. And it reminds you that this is a historic street. To repair that street, it means taking up the brick, putting sand underneath, turning the brick over so it wears in a different manner. And so this is a historic street in that sense. So say something about the spirituality of the corridor, the streetscape. The building next door is an older building. It's characteristic of the area. It is changing in use. You have young children. It's gone through an era of older people retiring. And so this is a younger generation. This concern a younger generation. Yeah, say something about the people who wanted to hug this tree.
Oh, well, again, I live about a block from the tree, and I'll say what's remarkable about this intersection of High and Kohler is it is, as you say, High Street is one of the brick streets in Urbana. It's just a block from Illinois Street and Green Street, both of which are a little busier, but this corner is kind of like a whole world away, even though it's just a block away. And the tree is a big part of that. This tree makes a canopy that's 90 feet wide, and we have some other trees in town that spread that wide, but it's also 110 feet tall. So when you're looking up, you have this ceiling over you, completely enveloping the 3-story houses. I mean, the 2-story houses with attic around it. And it just forms this big outdoor room.
And this is not a tree like a basswood. A basswood has tillers. It's called Tilia americana. And it has a burr rabbit hole in the buttress roots, and you can imagine organisms getting in there and finding the hollow way. And this tree, as a basswood, will fall over, and another trunk will take over. It's sort of from an era of sand dunes where it was covered over and one tree would die. This is not that sort of tree. See, we need to know about those sorts of things, and the public needs to know about
Yeah.
it.
A hackberry, I understand it. I'm not a botanist, but I understand it's a relative of the elm tree, and like it has a different branching form than oaks or maples. It stands and has these beautifully fluted branches that kind of soar up and then curve down at their tips.
Long barrel.
That's right. And you're right, it has a long single trunk. Not all hackberries do have the single trunk form. Some of them branch low down. This one, its first branch is something like 25 feet off the ground, and that 5-foot wide trunk just soars without taper right up, almost to the roof of the house before it branches. It's just a sight to behold, David. It's a beautiful tree.
So what does the neighborhood house say about the possibility of a branch falling on their house?
Well, the house that's immediately under the tree is a rental house, and the generations of students actually have rented that house. And there's another tree out front that a tire swing hangs from, so it's known among students as the tire swing house. And among student lore, there have been several bands, I guess, popular bands that have lived in that house. So it's one of these, in this part of Urbana, there's a mix of faculty, residents, and student renters. And this is one of those student rented houses that's considered really desirable and has a bit of a history to it. And this tree along the side is just absolutely associated with the house. Like I say, it shades the entire house. And paired together, as is seen in several photographs that are circulating of this tree, they go together as a unit, and it's just beautiful.
So are there any students in that house who have a civil engineering degree or have a sociology degree that want to do a project, perhaps even a master's degree, on this debate? Do you have those sorts of students who are growing up realizing that their natural history is gone? We've got 1 square mile of nice prairie left in a state that had 2/3 prairie. So we're looking at trees, and they're looking at trees. They're younger, and they know that they're going to have less resources than their grandparents. So do you have some committed people? And then you have to ask the administration, can they allow the engineer who typically doesn't have a lot of biology to step over into the biological areas and those sorts of things? It means group study rather than pure engineering, pure biology. It's something where you merge these things. It might even be a theologian would think about those people wanting to hug the tree.
So the wonderful thing about exploring the use of the legacy tree proposal here in the town is to begin to look at how we manage our trees and recognize their stature in new kinds of ways. And so it's a really kind of an evolution from management merely by logging to management by preservation. We have locally in several different organizations of preservation that are really well known, and I'm thinking of the Preservation and Conservation Association called PACA. They they're willing to sell to the public beautiful salvage parts of older homes, and they promote and they advocate for the preservation of homes in their entirety on the university campus, for example, and throughout the city. And they spend a lot of money in reworking and preserving older houses, and I'm thinking of the Solon House in Urbana, which has had to have its roof repaired and has gone through extensive porch restorations. And they never say that the money spent to restore these old homes is wasted. Indeed, they prefer that these steps be taken because it's part of the value of the community. And once some of these institutions, these buildings, or perhaps now we're talking about trees, are removed, we completely lose the history of our community. Now, recently we were really fortunate to put a historic plaque on East Main Street in Urbana, which which celebrates the history of an old elm tree that used to stand there for years and centuries, under which Abraham Lincoln gave a very important speech in 1856. Now, it's really interesting. That was during a rally for the presidential race, the first Republican ticket slated in the nation, and John Fremont was the candidate. And Lincoln came out and he reestablished his political career in support of that candidacy at that location in Urbana, in Weber's Grove. And we have now the original stump was in existence, and it was about 25 feet high back in 1902. There are photographs and historic record of it, but eventually was removed. Interestingly enough, this particular tree on Kohler and High was on the property owned by Judge Joseph W. Sim. Now, Judge Sim was a practicing lawyer and served as a judge at the county courthouse level, and he was also a mayor of Urbana for 2 years in 1864 to 1866, I believe were the dates. And so this tree is growing on his property. He owned the entire block between Green Street and High Street, Kohler, and what's the one to the McCullough. So this was on his property. He was a mayor of Urbana and a judge. And so, I mean, one could say that this is the Judge Sim hackberry.
Might be you have a big grove, which was the forest around Urbana where the early settlement was. But usually trees like to be well drained, so they follow the creeks. So the boneyard indeed may have had a few trees. If this is 200 years old, and you have to know that to get that 200 years old, you have to make a drill through the tree to find out that, and that can injure the tree.
Yes.
So we're guessing, but it might have been that there were some trees of this nature growing along the boneyard. It wasn't perhaps necessarily totally free of vegetation.
And we're aware from looking at the bird's eye view map of Urbana that was created in 1869 that there was a subsidiary creek flowing north right at that location into the boneyard, which of course that's now underground, probably in a sewer line somewhere. But that is, to the historical record that's visible on the 1869 map, bird's eye view of Urbana, as is Judge Sim's home located at the edge of town at that time.
You might explain that this was a book that was made for most communities, and it sort of puts the artist in an imaginary airplane that didn't exist at the time, making an oblique visual of the community. And that's what Dennis is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to get your whole family history in there, you paid a little bit more, and so it was a little selective as to who got into that book.
That's right. That was in the Pioneers of Champaign County. So we find that this tree meets so many different of the requirements for legacy tree nomination. Size, not so much rarity perhaps, but certainly size, historical or notable event quality, age certainly would apply, especially ecological value. It's a unique species in our area. It's not found, it certainly wasn't, I didn't know about hackberries where I lived, and I grew up in the Detroit area. The location is considerably important because of the property owner, and the aesthetics. We've talked about the beautiful canopy that people have enjoyed for decades and decades as they lived and walked up and down the brick street. So we're very hopeful that the community will come out and support this nomination, at least with the heart of exploring what's possible to do. We know from its history that the tree now has cables which help support some of the upper limbs. These cables are about 25 to 30 years old. Partly they were installed because one limb did fail and fall down to the ground, and it did create some damage, but it was removed. And if one limb can be removed and trimmed to mitigate potential danger, I'm sure that any other limb that may be considered to be in a similar condition can be trimmed. But we feel that even with a little bit of trimming, the main trunk could certainly prosper and grow and perhaps put out new top shoots for decades to come. It's hard to know what is possible before we explore it more carefully.
Do you have any instances of other trees that have been preserved in other communities using some of the tactics that you're talking about?
Well, it was very interesting that we came across a very important paper that was put out in a journal of preservation journal, an architectural preservation journal, and it talked about the preservation of a very large tree in Vancouver, British Columbia, that was estimated to be maybe 1,000 years old, and it was a red cedar tree. And the tree was so old and that it was hollow, and the tree had extensive damage. As a matter of fact, most of the top of the tree was gone, and it was basically a giant hollow tube about 60 or 70 feet tall. And it was so famous that people would come and pose under the tree. They'd back their car into the tree. They've had people, elephants standing in the gap of the tree. It was one of those local amazing events. And the tree was really pretty much had passed away already. But the community decided that it was important historically and as a symbol of the botanical vibrancy of the forestry in the area, and they chose to go through some considerable testing and experimentation about how to stabilize the tree. The park board originally was totally against any activity in that nature, but through public interest, they eventually changed their mind and agreed to work with the community to preserve the tree. And so we have basically a tree that died, and it's totally hollow, and it has a large opening in the front going all the way up the side, which the community chose to preserve. And it is today something that you can go, and there's an interpretive path, and there are plaques in front of it. Now, we're not interested in going to those depths, but we are interested in having a conversation, because we realize that if one community can do that much to preserve something that's so far gone, certainly we can take a little bit of energy to preserve something that seems to have a beautiful life ahead of it with some care and attention and some love from the community in return.
There's a tree on Prospect and University, which is an Osage orange tree, and it has limbs that spread out. And
Yes.
that tree has been preserved, and there's a little park district around it. I can remember a tree in Australia that was bent over, so it was in an arch, and its top was still alive on the ground, but it was also a historic monument. People would come and stand and take photographs under the arch. So, yes, there are communities other than our own are concerned, but our own community has already preserved a few trees. There's a tree outside Long's Garage. There's a tree on Ray Street in University that we have a debate about, which is on private property. But there's a spirit and philosophy here that we can tap into, I think.
I think that's right, and I think the other thing sort of worth noting, both about its potential legacy designation, is really its size. We've measured it as more than 16 feet around, about more than 110 feet, maybe 114 feet tall. It's the largest. We've verified with the city arborist that it's the largest publicly owned tree in Urbana, and possibly in Champaign-Urbana. In fact, we've sort of put the word out there, the question out there, where is the nearest larger tree? And we haven't answered that yet. So the blank in the sentence, this is the largest tree for blank miles of any species. This tree is larger than any of the other you've just named. It's the person who maintains the state's big tree register noted its submittal. It's been nominated for as a champion, potential champion hackberry tree, and for the state, and we await its official measurement. But he said it's clearly a contender for the state champion.
It's interesting that in some cases the tree stump has been preserved and put in a museum. That is another alternative for this tree in the long run. Sometimes the Garetta Busey area on Green Street, where an oak tree came down, there were huge tree that showed the rings when it was cut. It showed all the rings. So that sort of thing goes into a museum. We have to think about urban wildlife also. We don't have a lot, but in the bark of that tree there are insects. In the tree there are squirrels, as Dennis was saying. At one stage in this community there weren't many squirrels in town, so the university and others got together and brought in gray squirrels so that the students would have the chance to relate to a wild animal and care about it. So there's a metaphysical side to this too. We need the ecology that's a little bit beyond the tree.
I will say that our guests that come from Central Europe to visit are astounded by the wildlife that they find in American communities. And you're talking about places where, in my backyard I've had opossum, I've had raccoon. Yes, we've seen hawks down the street. There's just,
Turkeys.
We've had turkeys in the neighborhood. There are migrating birds overhead. Squirrels everywhere you look. Maybe too many, but now it's, beyond that. Our ability to maybe control that.